the departments, just to highlight a couple of things that in terms of what to look forward to in 2023. As it relates to administration, I've heard from a number of supervisors the idea to really go through the program prioritization or a discussion to highlight the difference between what are mandatory and discretionary programs. So my intent is to focus on that after the budget is adopted. Revamping our budget calendar. Again, recently at the WCA conference, we heard from another county about the idea of a budget summit earlier in the year to really engage the full board. I think that has a lot of merit. I think our process, at least certainly over the last couple of years, where we utilize recordings to allow the full board to have access to the budget sooner than we had in the past, has served us well. But I really like the idea of a budget summit, so I'd like to work with the board to incorporate that. And then we've done a lot of work on our capital improvement policy, with the exception of rolling stock. Our rolling stock approach hasn't changed since 2010. Our allocations to departments haven't changed, and it isn't working. I think there are some innovative things we can do there, and I really want to address that in 2023.
Could I just interrupt you with a comment that I would hope that would also look at that whole issue relative to IT with licensure versus purchasing.
Great idea.
So if we can expand that into that area as well, because we've been struggling with that.
Absolutely. Very, very good feedback. Thank you. The Aging Disability Resource Center, the main thing that I want to focus on with them in 2023 is really evaluating how and when we can get them to return, move their site from its current location back to the Lakeview campus where they had been previously. I think it's financially advantageous for both parties. It's about $100,000 annually in rent that would come back to the county. So we certainly make a levy allocation to the ADRC, having that come back to us in terms of rental revenue as opposed to an outside agency makes good long-term sense. It also aligns the services with the other agencies that are on the campus. In terms of Central Wisconsin Airport, I referenced this already. They have some debt payments that will take place yet this year that will impact our overall debt limit or debt obligation, I should say, that I referenced earlier in the presentation. So that's one highlight. In terms of CCIT, City County Information Technology Commission, certainly you'll hear me say this again, Workday, they are really central to that entire effort, and that's not going to, and we talk about our implementation being January of 2023, that's our target, we're working toward that, but true implementation is going to take certainly all of 2023. There are a lot of add-ons. It's simply the first step happening at the beginning of the year, should everything continue as we hope. The other piece that I really want to work on is, and I do serve as the chair of the CCITC Commission, is trying to really hone in on what the mission is of CCIT. And as I see that mission, it's deriving benefit from consolidating services. I talked about consolidating footprints in terms of our buildings previously. You know, the real value of CCIT, the financial value, is when we have the city, the county, and North Central Healthcare utilizing shared systems. If we all have our own unique software systems, we're not deriving the maximum benefit, and we need to be more fiscally responsible. So I want to work with that commission and staff to really dive in and see how we're doing there, essentially doing a review of all of those services. Technology can be an asset, but we need to fight what appears, in my sense, to be the inclination that every process needs to have technology added on top of it. The Clerk of Court's office, technology upgrades. I just got done talking about technology, but there is a piece of technology that I want to actually work with the full board to have you get a tour of the upgrades we've made to the courtrooms. I just got done meeting with the judges yesterday. They are very happy with the pilot that we've done relative to infrastructure upgrades within the courtrooms and one of their hearing rooms. that the rest of that work will be completed in 2023. We need to use that technology to remove barriers to cases moving through the justice system and getting defense attorneys to take those cases because there are limits in terms of attorneys available. The second big piece for them is restitution evaluation, and I referenced that in the budget. Essentially, it's leveraging our success with the state debt collection office to see if we want to use that for restitution collection to help crime victims. Conservation planning and zoning. Updating the groundwater plan is one of their long-term goals, so really planning out what that might look like. Amending our personal on-site wastewater treatment system agreement with McDevco to make sure it's more accessible to individuals in the rural community. And as referenced in other previous meetings with this body, we did recently transfer 2 positions to that office to address property listing, the property lister and then the parcel mapper. We really need to follow up and see how that's working. Corporation counsel, records retention, another thing that is similar to our financial system. It's been a long time since that's been updated. Mike and his team are going to work on that and those agreements for legal services I previously referenced. County clerk, Kim and her staff have taken over, as you know, this year, all of the standing committees except for the Environmental Resources Committee have done an excellent job. I think that's, again, that consolidation of service idea. And then, as I referenced before, Kim's evaluating what does that filling that currently vacant position look like moving forward. Treasurer's office, another example of workday. They really, again, are based on their work in terms of receipting, that workday implementation and all of the kind of add-ons that go with it are going to be something they focus on in 2023. They also were involved in, of course, that shift of property listing down to the Conservation Planning and Zoning Office. District Attorney's Office, I referenced the new 1.0 limited term employee for victim witness. That's really one of the things looking forward in 2023. The other is that those big data needs that I talked about. And I referenced it from January of 2020 to May of 2022, we've gone from 6 terabytes to 48. And we need to make sure we're delivering on our statutory obligations, but there's a lot of financial cost that comes with that as well. So in the coming year, the District Attorney's Office, Sheriff's Office, CCIT, and County Administration, we're really going to dive into that and see what are those sustainable solutions that might be available. And we'll have to work with the state of Wisconsin on that based on the partnership we have when we operate a District Attorney's Office is with the state. Emergency management. This is something that's been a priority through the Public Safety Committee, and it's been discussed at the full board, and that's that idea of countywide EMS. I'm going to have the emergency manager look for funding to explore those opportunities, really try to drill down what is it going to cost to do that feasibility study, and are there sources of funding for that. Facilities and capital management, it's really continue more of the same. They've been doing a great job with consolidation of our footprint, continue to enhance our capital improvement planning, and move on to, as I referenced before, that evaluation of rolling stock. Finance Department, we're going to pry Kayenta from Christie's hands in 2023. So the workday implementation is really job one for finance, apart from, of course, keeping the finances of the county going. And kind of in line with that is post-workday, we really need to evaluate and start to implement what does centralized finance look like. We have a lot of finance professionals, particularly in our larger departments, that I think we would be better served by having those individuals report directly to finance than to report to the individual department directors. That doesn't mean that there's not a strong relationship there, but having that centralization of finance, I think, will be something we'll evaluate in 2023, how to make that happen. Health Department, in 2023, I already referenced the transition from the Start Right model to the Nurse Family Partnership model. excellent example of staff kind of researching how is it that we're going to do that, the work that the board has identified more effectively. So we'll make that happen in 2023. And they're one of those departments that I wanted them to look at their fee structure in 2023. The Highway Department, a big part of the work that the Infrastructure Committee has done is this idea of highway sustainability in terms of funding. We'll have to continue to build on that to make sure that we have a long-term plan. We're going to need to continue to leverage state and federal funding that's coming available for infrastructure projects. And as I referenced before, updating our rolling stock practices are really, that needs to happen for the Highway Department, but particularly for the Highway Department, but also for other departments. Human Resources, very similar to Finance. Workday is going to be the focus, and really build out that employee training component of that system, and that loss control strategy that I referenced before, working with that professional through our insurance broker to have that long-term approach to limiting costs. Library, I referenced before the idea of sitting down with the library director and developing that long-term capital plan, very similar to the 5-year capital plan that this committee has seen and the board has seen recently, and developing those shared service agreements with our Human Resources Department, our Finance Department, Facilities and Capital Management, and Corporation Counsel. Medical Examiner, this is an area where we've made so much progress in 2023. I'm hopeful that, in 2022. I'm hopeful that in 2023 we will be able to put shovel in ground to start construction on a regional forensic science center, but that of course is yet to be seen. We're trying to get the state to contribute funding to that. Jess and her team have done a great job, but that really, in 2023, the other part of the focus they're going to have is piloting a different staffing model, and I referenced this in the staffing section, the new employee request section, so I'm not going to belabor those points here, but we're doing a pilot right now. If it's successful, we will implement that through the budget by abolishing certain existing positions and creating new positions in 2024. Parks, Rec, and Forestry, they have wrapped up or have very nearly wrapped up the West Side Master Plan, so that'll be presented to the board yet. Our hope is yet this year. And then based on the board's action, it's really starting to plan what does that look like to implement that over time. And in addition to that, very similar to the Highway Department, this idea of sustainability of funding. We are very fortunate. We have a lot of parks assets within our county park system, but how do we make sure that our maintenance of those assets is done in a sustainable way? Register of Deeds. Within the narrative section, we explain how Dean really has been very helpful as we've tried to tackle the backlog of property listings with the updates that need to happen when property transactions occur. And with those significant increase in property transactions over the last several years, a backlog developed. Dean in the Register of Deeds office, our Register of Deeds, has assisted us in kind of making some efficiency improvements, and we're going to continue to do that in 2023, working with the Conservation Planning and Zoning Office to make sure that we're addressing that, and we are making progress on that backlog, so that's positive to see. The Sheriff's Office, I referenced a lot of the things that they're going to be doing already. Moving on from the highlight of the shelter home evaluation we did in 2022, it's really focusing on secure detention and making sure that we are operating that in a way that is fiscally sustainable. We can't operate that facility essentially subsidizing other counties. We're going to need to make sure that Marathon County taxpayers receive good value from the operations of that secure detention facility, or we'll evaluate different models to do it. But I'm confident the Sheriff's Office is well on their way to doing that. We've also worked very closely thus far, the Chief Deputy and I, to try to evaluate how can we strengthen our partnership with North Central Healthcare. I referenced the jail meal increase in cost from 2020 to 2023, that substantial jump. The sheriff's office is working with North Central to evaluate whether or not North Central can actually provide those meals to individuals within our jail at a similar cost. And then in a similar vein, we're talking with North Central about how can we address some of the challenges we have with our high utilizers within our criminal justice system, within our jail particularly, that have, they're not only being housed in the jail, but as you know, when you're housed in the jail, you lose any public benefits you might have relative to medical costs, medical care. So an individual who might have otherwise qualify for Badger care and they have to get various medications, perhaps a psychotropic injection that's several $1,000s a month, the county pays that when the individual is incarcerated. So can we look at some alternative housing strategies, perhaps some community-based residential facilities with North Central to make people eligible for those benefits, continue their eligibility, and decrease those costs? We're evaluating that in 2023. Social services, the big piece here is that we've been preparing for their move to the Lakeview Drive campus, and that will happen in the middle of the year. Like I said before, there's a significant opportunity for this committee to evaluate what does property divestment look like and how are you going to utilize those funds if in fact you do divest yourselves of that property. There's the new model for shelter services that we're going to work to really put in place in 2023 and continue our effort to really drive down our out-of-home care days that children in Marathon County are experiencing. If you look to page 43 in the budget book, you can see the substantial costs that we have within within that system for out-of-home care days and how they are substantially increasing. We are working to drive down our overall cost for out-of-home care spending, but you'll see the average placement cost for some of our high-cost placements. They are substantial. When you think about an average placement, a yearly placement in a residential care facility of $178,000, nearly $179,000, or a correctional care placement currently of just shy of $430,000. So continuing with the directive from the federal government, the Families First Prevention Services Act, really doing all we can to make sure that we maintain children in a safe and suitable placement, but focusing on those least restrictive placements if at all possible. So social services will continue in that effort. Looking forward then to solid waste. Solid Waste Department is continuing to work to get all of the necessary approvals for their expansion, and they've received those to continue to make sure we handle our waste in a very environmentally sustainable way. The opportunity that I see working with solid waste is, it's something I mentioned last year in the budget presentation, and that is we certainly need to focus on complying with all environmental regulations, safely handling waste, but I do think there's an opportunity for the Solid Waste Department as one of our enterprise funds to start to contribute to general fund revenues. Other counties have done that. We historically have not. The recent inflationary pressures have impacted solid waste as well. They've implemented some new practices to control costs and no idling policy. So that's made the discussion about having revenues return to the general fund a little bit more difficult, but we really need to do that and have that conversation in 2023. Tipping fees are going up at the Solid Waste Department. The Solid Waste Management Board, working with staff, have identified what those fees are going to look like moving forward, so we do have the opportunity for that revenue growth. In terms of UW Marathon County, UW Extension, Marathon County Extension.
I like the first
Yeah,
one.
you like that, I figured. The work that I see, the opportunity that I see with Extension is really trying to do a better job of leveraging that, what they refer to as the statewide network. There are a lot of professionals within the UW Extension statewide network, and I think we have some opportunities to do that a little bit better. In terms of veteran service, the last department, before I kick it over to Christy to go through the 5-year department changes, veteran service, like social services, they are going to be moving down from their current River Drive location down to the Lakeview Drive campus. So that relocation, making that happen in 2023 will be a focus. They're also one of the departments, along with social services and the ADRC, that are going to be having some form of presence at the community partner campus based on the lease that I'm working on to finalize with representatives from the community partner campus utilizing ARPA, some of our ARPA allocation, which was approved by the board earlier this year. And then I just wanted to again mention the excellent work that Jill and her team have done in terms of work sharing, making staff available based on efficiencies that they've had within their office to help out as they're able, whether it's scanning or some other professional clerical work, other departments across the county. Because certainly, as I referenced before, we can't add all the positions that departments want. We need to find ways to better cooperate. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Christy to talk about the 5-year changes in the department budgets. And those are in your,
Do you want to put page 48? I wanted to just kind of give them an overview because the numbers are really, really big. So we're going to go from big to little. Okay, so what I just wanted to, I can't, this is not going to work. I'm going to look at my screen because I can't wear reading glasses and look at something that far away. So what I just wanted to do is let you know, these numbers are big. This is a lot of budget, right? But if you think about it, if you take the last 3 numbers off and you knock those off, it looks like a budget that you guys can handle. It's something that you may be buying a house. You may be looking at cars, you have loans, you've got student loans, you've got kids, you've got grandparents, you've got dogs. Dogs this month have cost me more than anything else I think I've spent any money on. But it's really a budget that's like a budget that you have in your home. You can control it, you manage it, things are out of your control. So when you look at it that way. If it means you kind of take and look at how you manage your own home budget on a monthly basis, daily basis, annual basis, what you're looking to buy, what you're looking to sell, what you can't figure out how to do with, because when you go to the grocery store, sometimes the silliest things like pumpkin spice is gone, and it's pumpkin spice latte month, so I had a hard time with that one. But it's the way it is. So I just want everybody to feel like this is a budget. It looks big. It looks like there's a lot of pieces to it. But remember, it's really, this is the family that you have here at the county, and this is how we run a big budget. But it looks similar to what every one of us have at our own home and how we put things together and try to figure out how to make things work. But what I do want to talk about on this chart is 2 things. One is if you take a look at the revenues, which are on the gray scale, and it's on the left-hand side, it's really interesting to really see where does all the money come. And you're going to see that a little over a third of it is taxes. That includes property taxes, that includes sales tax, and it includes a few other things like a forestry tax and some other things. So a little over a third of our whole budget gets funded by taxes. And that's consistent throughout the years. If you take a look at other budgets, really it's about a third of the budget itself is going to be taxes. And some of those increase, and the proportion may increase or decrease a little bit. As we talked about sales tax, that budgeted amount is going to increase. And that's a sales tax not only on the citizens of Marathon County, but those of us that buy the things that are sales tax attributable within Marathon County. The next area I just wanted to go over is intergovernmental grants and intergovernmental charges. So that's almost another 30%. Intergovernmental grants, when you look at the departments that are the ones that you think of as doing health and human services, CPZ, health department, they are typically getting a grant. We are being funded to do a service that really no other person would be doing. That's why we're a government agency. Intergovernmental charges are really those departments that run a business, such as our highway department. The biggest customer at the highway department, there's 2 of them, the county and the state. When we charge the state, we're not getting a grant per se. We're actually charging them for the work we do. So I like to put those together to kind of figure out those are the times that we're getting money to do a service for another government. They're the fiscal agent, we're the doers, they're the approvers. We're learning that in Workday. There's doers and approvers. So if you put those together, that's really what we're getting to be funded by other governments to do the work. And then the other one I would just wanted to talk about that's really interesting is public charges, fines and forfeitures, and licenses and permit. And if you add those all up, it doesn't even equal 8%. So less than 10% of our total budget is coming from those public charges. But yet, if you would take a look at that, it's still a substantial amount of money that we are collecting from all of those areas. So I just wanted to put that out there. And then if you look at the recommended budget expenses, the proportions on an annual basis don't really change, although social services has exceeded public safety by a little bit, but that's really consistent throughout the departments. And I'm just going to go through the general government. If you think of this courthouse and the building here, which is the courthouse, most of us that work here are general government employees. Either we're doing the work just to keep the lights on and keep the building going and paying the bills and collecting the taxes, running the elections. Those are the types of things that we do. CPZ, the C and the P are part of general government. The Z is actually the economic development slice that you see there in that budget. It's tiny. It's land conservation and a little bit of our other money. That's our number one place that we're spending our money. That's where we're putting the money in. So when you're looking at that department by department part, you can picture in your mind that the different parts of this pie and where that money is proportionate to our total budget. Next highest is transportation. That is things that move. That's called highway and airports. So 1/5 of our budget expenses are highway and airport. Next is social services at 14.3%, and that's your social services and veterans department. After that's public safety, and that is the sheriff's department, everything they do on their 24/7 operations. After that, then things get a little bit smaller as we really look at leisure activities at almost 10%. It's 9.4 is your library, special education, and parks and recreation, really. Health is health and solid waste. Those we keep in there. Debt you talked about as a separate item, and capital projects are the CIP, and then we do have a small amount of CIP programs within the general fund budget. And that's really just wanted to kind of give you a feel for, sometimes you can look at numbers, but sometimes having a visual like this when you're going through the substantial budget book, it kind of gets you into perspective on how much we're spending on different areas and how we pay for all of those things. So I just want to put that out for those of you that are more of a visual learner. Or I like pie charts. I like taking a look at those because I spend all day on numbers crunching them, and sometimes taking that look back at what you really have in there makes it a little bit more less overwhelming and a little bit more context. Do you want to throw us up? I think we're at like 135. And Lance is going to start that one. I am going to use my spreadsheet that I've got here. So we're going to start with the county administration. And if the increase or decrease is within a percentage or two, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that because really what they've done is met the criteria of where we wanted to be on presenting a budget to you for that department. Administration is slightly under their tax levy supported budget from last year, and that's really the column I'll be focusing on. So if you look at the third of the screen, which is what you're looking on tax levy, that's where I'm really taking a look. So they're within the tax levy, within a percentage of where they were last year. On capital improvements, this really is a CIP that you see as presented separately, and then we do have a small amount of small projects that we have within the general fund, and that is typically $365,000, and that would be broken up between several different departments so that we can get small projects done throughout the course of the year. Clerk of courts, they are again within $1,100 of last year's tax levy. They do have some revenues that are up over last year's in regards to some of their areas, and I know that Kelly's done a really nice job of trying to put together a comprehensive budget for us up there in the clerk of court's office. Conservation, planning, and zoning. Whoa, look at that. They're up a little bit in the tax levy, but we have moved 2 staff members from the treasurer's office to CPZ, and that includes some GIS folks. Administrative coordinator for GIS and GIS tech, and some changes within their budget for benefits as well. So that incorporates almost all of that increase for them. So if you look at it that way, it's just moving it from one department to the other. It's staying the same as Lance had talked about the FTEs. That is really what that main focus of that increase is. With that, next page, we talked a little bit about contingency fund. When you see the budget resolution, the contingency fund has 2 parts to it, and there's a statute that kind of goes along with it. So there's going to be a $750,000 contingency. That is for the full county board, and you need to have a vote on that, and it's 2/3 vote to move money from contingency to do something. Now, if you want to think about it in your house, it's middle of winter and your furnace breaks. How are you going to, you call because you don't want to freeze, but contingency is kind of for those types of things. A lot of times what we've used it in the past, large snowstorm and we don't have all the money for, we've gone through all of our highway plowing money, winter maintenance we call it, we'll ask for contingency fund. In some cases, in the clerk of court's office, we have a huge high profile murder trial. We don't have her budget for that. We make sure she budgets and maintains a regular jury expense budget, but we would go to contingency to cover the cost of some of those items.
And that's a great example of contingency, and you'll see in the rest of the budget, I specifically referenced that not only within the clerk of courts, but it's also the district attorney's office.
Yeah.
You know, when we have high-profile cases, and both Mike and I were prosecutors in the DA's office, if you have to go out and get a series of experts for a significant case, and it's a 8, 10, maybe 2-week trial, I was 8-10 days or 2 weeks, that can be expensive. And we don't want to have, like Christy said, we don't want people to budget for things that happen once every 4 years. That's not a great use of tax levy. So we budget tight, and when we do need those things, contingency is the place that we would otherwise go.
Yep. And one year we did have to go to contingency for the medical examiner because the increased cost of pathology, but that was going to be sustained over the time. So we incorporate those types of things. If it's a spike, a one-time spike, we handle it through contingency. If it's something we see as a pattern, then we make it we roll it into our normal course of business in the budget in following years. Corp Counsel, they have had some staffing changes and benefit reductions is really what the difference is between that based on just the cost of running our payroll. Board of Supervisors, good job. You're really within your limits that you had within your budget. County Clerk, the one thing that we do fluctuate in the budget is the election year budgets for the county clerk, and we do track that separately. So next year is a non-election year of 2023. Yep. So that is where a lot of the increase or the decrease has been, not only in the expense side but also on the revenue side, because she charges out to other local governments for that. She also has a reduction in some of the tax deed expense, and due to some of the turnover within the department, and we were budgeting at those positions, there is a little bit of a lower cost of payroll with benefits. And I do also have one of Kim's employees working with us as well, and unfortunately, due to some staffing changes, he isn't able to work with us quite as much as we did, but she's also been very helpful in having her staff work with all of us in all the departments to get things done. Debt service we'll talk about separately, and that's really from the debt service schedule for the amount of money that we are paying on an annual debt service, and this would be the levy portion of it to cover the cost of those issues that we are beholden to pay with general county payments. There are actually two issues left. We've paid the 2010 airport, 2010 debt off at the airport. So there are 2 additional debt service payment schedules that are paid. They're in the name of Marathon County, but they are for airport debt, and they are able to make those payments without any tax levy needed to make those payments as well. Next page is district attorney. They are down a little bit. We did fund a position, a portion with grant and portion with ARPA funding for them. I believe it's in the victim witness area. Yep. Emergency management. There's 2 things going on here for the substantial reduction in tax levy, because we had an increase in revenues but a decrease. So there's changes to reduction on the benefits side for the staff that are available that are in the budget. And secondly, for our benefit, we are really happy. What has happened is they are now budgeting on a fiscal year cycle, the annual calendar cycle. So there's a cutoff at the end of the year where a grant would used to roll over. One of the things you'll learn in government, and that's why we have the other financing sources and other financing uses. It's what we would call a rollover or a carryover in most cases. The county has a fiscal year which is January 1st to December 31st. So as you see, our budget that you'll be discussing, reviewing, approving is from January 1st to December 31st. The state of Wisconsin has a fiscal year that starts July 1st to June 30th. So when I squeeze a state-sponsored grant budget in here, I'm going to carry over a portion of it from my annual budget into my next annual budget because their fiscal year is on a different schedule. So for emergency management, they are now getting some of those grants that they had gotten previously on a state and federal grant cycle on a calendar cycle. And lastly, if that wasn't enough, the federal government has an October 1st to a September 30th fiscal year. So again, we are going to roll over some of those. So that happens in quite a few of our departments, but that one is actually where they are going to be able to do a calendar year-based budget for some of their grants. Employee resources is up slightly as well. I didn't really have a note for them, so if you want, I can take a look at them after that. Because I was more excited about facilities and capital management. I have 3 words: utilities, garbage, and benefits. And not necessarily in that order, but utilities are up, and we are using ARPA to offset some of the costs of the natural gas, electric, and water. The other ones are garbage. I didn't count garbage in that but it is up. Many of the things that they do just to keep the lights on are up. And that, remember, similar to how our house budget is, it's going to be a cold winter. My husband told me he's heard there's going to be a lot of snow, so I'm either going to pay more in natural gas prices to heat my home or in gas to use the snow blower. So think of it as your home. What are the things in your home? Facilities is really running all of our buildings and keeping them warm and keeping the lights on and keeping the snow clear. What are those things in your home that are going to go up? And it's the same thing, but just reflected 10 to 100 times that amount in our budgets here. And that's where we are with capital facilities and capital management, because they are the budget that we do put all of that in for all of our buildings, almost all of our buildings. But finance, we're up a little bit, and that we do pay a major portion of our audit fees on those, and those are typically go up 2 to 3% a year for our financial audit. We used to have a account called Finance General Accounting Insurance that may have been supported by tax levy. I've left it in here. As we go to Workday, some of these things that you see, we use not only to show you a presentation, but we also use it to make as a validity check to make sure that we've captured everything within the budget, because it really is more of a manual process than it should be with the current system that we have. So I leave that in there because that also reminds me to take a look at that to make sure that that sub-org has been accounted for or not accounted for. So once we move to Workday, that will be eliminated in the budget. Health Department, I think Lance had touched on that a little bit. One of the things that we are doing is the new program, and I can't remember the name of it. Start Right is the old one, and I do not know the new program's name. So that is a change in the way that we run that program, and that's been also reflected in the amount that's left in the budget. Highway, you'll see in the CIP, most of the highway projects are going to be in the CIP. So you do see in the CIP that there's going to be a little over 9.3 million in new highway projects, along with the bituminous, along with bridge aid and some of their other items. That is where a substantial number of the amount for the funding is. And then we can reflect on more of that and get more into that in the CIP process itself, because really that's where all the additional funding lies for them. And insurance, insurance is, we run actually a property and casualty fund and an employee benefit fund for government fund accounting, if you look at the statements. But within those, we have to pay for the insurance, we have to pay for the claims, and that's the expense side. But we also have to have a customer that is willing to pay us to have the insurance coverage. So that's the other county departments, the other organizations and entities that we insure, employees for such things as COBRA, insurance for health insurance, employee contributions for health and dental, and also a little bit of interest income and third party, if we get money back from a third party on a claim or something like that. So that's why it's levy neutral, but you will see the expense for the levy portion of that in the department budgets for the health insurance, dental, workers' comp, and possibly the property and casualty for like the auto insurance and those types of items. Library, Lance had talked about, it is down because we have actually taken a $350,000 in fund balance specifically for the library. And again, at the end of the year, whatever you budget and apportion to the library stays with the library. It will not roll back into the general fund. Next, we were talking about medical examiner. And again, they're up slightly, and that's mostly personnel and benefit costs. They do have some increases in gasoline as well, but again, they are doing a really good job of trying to make sure that they're monitoring their budget along with doing the job that they do. Parks and Recreation is up slightly as well. They do have an increase we do monitor several things in the Parks and Recreation. Not only one of the great things about the Parks Department is people are using our parks, they're using our campgrounds, they're using our forests, and so we also have timber sales. So we manage and watch the timber sale amount. We look at how our campgrounds are doing, and they're doing really well. So at this point, there's some things I think that Jamie's been focusing on and trying to do, maybe the West Side Master Plan and some of those things, but they're doing a nice job of keeping those parks up to date, and people are enjoying them, and we can see that through the increase in fees that we're receiving in those departments. Registered deeds, that you have to think of as opposite. They're like they like to say they're one of our money-making departments, and that's really not correct. Their revenues that they collect, and most of them by statute, so he's not really creating his own schedule, but they're collecting funds because the name says it, because of the deeds that are in there, the birth certificates that are there, the required forms that they're obligated to keep, and the dollar amount they're required to charge to obtain those records. And their revenues are actually down. They're actually down almost $200,000. Why? When economies are good and people are refinancing and people are doing that, they are very, very busy. As the interest rates climb and the attractiveness of refinancing your home, or there are no homes to buy, or there are no ability for us to have refinancing, his revenues will go down. So he's really a lag indicator on the economy, because he's really kind of beholden in his fees and his activity on what is going on in the general economy, because that's where a major portion of his fees would be coming from. Sheriff, we break them into three different places. Now it will be two in the future, but the sheriff is the sheriff's department proper. So that would be communications, traffic, patrol, investigations, bomb squad, SWAT team. That's the first amount. Those people are in the first level that you're looking at for sheriff's department. The increases are in wages. They're in gasoline. They're in some of those administration, investigation, and traffic, and then also gasoline is we accumulate the cost of gas into the admin portion of their budget, and increase in gas alone is almost not $100,000. It's about $95,000 for next year. So that's where a larger portion of his is. Sheriff Adult Correction and Juvenile Detention, that is the corrections facilities for both the adults and our juveniles. And that one we talked about, there will be an increase in revenue. We do have our juvenile detention facility, and in the past budget a little over $250,000 in revenue a year, because we will be working on having outside agencies and counties bring juveniles to our detention facility. That is increased and put in the budget at $912,500, and that is an increase of over $650,000 a year. So that's where it is. It mitigates some of the other costs, because running an adult correctional facility, medical, food, any of the things that County Administrator Lance, I was going to call County Administrator Leonard, has talked about today, is already incorporated in that budget as well.
One other piece on that, just to clarify. Certainly, the Sheriff's Office, we've been having conversations, Christy, myself, and Sheriff's Office leadership about juvenile detention. There's an increase in revenue. I just want to be very clear. That's not net revenue. That is gross. If things work great, we essentially break even, maybe a little plus. If this new approach, this new model that the chief deputy and his staff are working on doesn't pan out, the budget that the kind of business plan that we put together is, if we stop operating the juvenile detention center, it's a wash. So I don't want anybody to think, hey, operating a juvenile detention center is some great business to get into, unless they wish to do so, and then we will contract with them, because we haven't found the business plan to make that really cost effective. But it is a real step forward. I credit to the Sheriff's Office about taking a new approach, but I don't want you to think that we're making a bunch of money in our juvenile corrections.
The shelter home is closed, but we did leave in there the amount of money that because it's part of the same building as juvenile detention, there are the fixed costs that are there for utilities and the other items, just to keep that portion of the building from freezing up and making sure lights work and all that. So we've left that in there this year, and I'll probably, once we go workday, we'll probably just roll that into the sheriff full correction budget. But we always had it out there because even back as long ago as 2003, 2004, we've always reviewed the shelter home, and it used to be a licensed home for, I believe, 20 people, was reduced to 8. So we've always tracked that separately in the budget for these purposes. And now that it has come to a close, and we're just closing out the fixed costs that are still associated with that building and budget. And social services, again, they've taken on some of that shelter home cost within their own budget, because we still have children in need that need to have a place to go. But they've also then been able to do some other things to leverage some of the funds, and their increase is minimal at a little under $55,000 in levy.
Yeah, just to build on that, if it weren't for that transfer of levy from, if you look up the line above, the decrease of that 400,000, about probably 300 of that levy is being transferred to social services, they would be down. I mean, I just want to, again, commend the social services department. They've really done an exceptional job of managing their budget and aiming to reduce costs while maintaining service level. But that transfer of levy from the sheriff's office to deliver shelter services differently is what accounts for some of that, certainly that increase. Otherwise, they would have a reduction in their overall tax levy budget.
Solid waste itself is fully supported by its user fees. And so they are basically giving you a budget that provides the information on their operating budget. There's also, I believe, a chart in here that talks about the amounts on their fees, their tipping fees, and what makes up the tipping fee. I will get back to support for other agencies because the breakout for each one of those agencies is later in the just in the budget book. But we can explain where the increase is for the $515,000. Transfer between funds. Sometimes transfer between funds is we have in governmental funds, you have the general fund, social improvement fund, debt fund, capital improvement fund, highway fund, solid waste fund, insurance funds, airport fund, and ADRC fund for us. And sometimes you need to move money in between those. And a lot of times what happens for us, particularly number one place where the transfer between funds is happening, at the end of 2021, after audit, any monies within a tax levy supported fund that are unassigned and not working capital may be transferred to fund CIP projects in the year after audit. So 21 monies are being transferred in to pay for 2023 projects. And there's a transfer in from the general fund and a small transfer in from the social improvement fund to the CIP fund. And that's where a major portion of all those are. I believe it's like, we get to the CIP, but I think it's like 6.9 million in CIP in fund balance. And so you'll see that 7.7, and a major portion of that would be the money that we're rolling in from those two funds to fund a portion of CIP, and then a portion of that, then a little over $1 million rolls back out to the highway department to support the rolling stock, and one other project mentioned in the CIP. So it's really just moving money in between ourselves, but because each fund has to be reported separately, we also need to track that for those purposes. Also make sure you know where all the money's going, because sometimes that's harder to keep track of than the other one, because we're keeping it one and then we moved it over here, but then someone else needs it, so then I have to move it back to them. And so that's what transfers from each other funds are. Treasurer's office is another one of those that looks a little odd. It's usually one that has revenues far exceeding our budget than the expenses, and it looks like revenues are down. But what we did is our new sales tax for 2023 is $15,495,000. A portion of that is within the county treasurer's office budget. The other portion of $2.6 million is in the debt service fund this year. So even though it looks down in general and in total, we do have an increase in the sales tax for 2023 over 2024. It's almost $1 million. UW Extension, they have a small small increase in fees, which translate to a small decrease in the overall levy for the county. Veteran Administration, that amount is just a reduction in a grant. They get one grant from State of Wisconsin. Last year it was budgeted at $26,000. This year it's back to its a little $13,000 plus a little bit more that we had in there. So it's really just a decrease in our revenue for a grant that they receive. Airport is a separate governmental entity owned by Marathon County and Portage County, of which Marathon County is a fiscal agent. One of the interesting things about the airport that I'll just bring up now, we talked a little bit about there's debt service that they pay, but it's got the name of Marathon County on it. Well, the airport is not able to levy a tax by itself because it is not a governmental entity that has the power to do so. So I separate the airport debt. It is Marathon County debt, but the airport has in the past and in the future been able to support its annual debt service payments. And one of the items that was passed earlier, I believe this year, was the fact that they are one of the only entities that was able to use their CARES funds to pay off one of their debts. So the 2010 debt should have had additional principal payments, but they were able to use CARES funds, their own CARES funds. They weren't funds that would even have been able to come over to the county, Marathon County side, to pay off a portion of that remaining portion of their debt. But they do have the 2012 and 2014 debt service that they're still making payments on for improvements at the airport. And again, they are not tax levy supported. They've been tax levy supported 1 year in the last at least 20 years, and that was the year after 9/11, so it was 2002. And I believe they had a little over $100,000 in tax levy support. Special education, what is that and why is that in here? Special education is statutory, the Handicapped Children's Education Board, and there's only several in the state. Marathon County as one of them. And in the past, they were really considered a department of Marathon County, and they were able to spin off. But yet, again, they are not able to levy a tax directly for themselves. They levy it through the school districts that they support. So we've always had them as a presentation here. The other little odd twist with the Handicapped Children's Education Board is that even though they are truly look like a separate governmental entity, they have their own department, they have their own payroll, they have their own work. They are part of the county in so much as that they are considered county employees for ETF and WRS reporting, or the Wisconsin Retirement System reporting, so we do have to collapse them into some of our annual reporting. We have gone to the state of Wisconsin to ask if we could separate and provide them documentation, and upon the last review, which was several years ago, they said no, that this is the format of which we need to stay. So they're sort of a department, and they're sort of not a department. Otherwise, that is why they're presented there, but we had no levy support. Their levy support, or their support, would come from the schools' special education grants and special education category grants that they receive, but we put them in for presentation only. ADRC is a separate governmental entity as well. That is a 4-county group, and the budget that you see here is their actual total budget, and when we go to support for other agencies, the county's amount has been the same, and the county amount for the other 3 counties, I believe, also has been the same since they joined the ADRC Central Wisconsin. We'll go to the big numbers now. The total amount we talked about is $215 million, which is incorporates all the things that we've talked about. The revenues that we've collected is a little over $157 million. Therefore, the amount that's left is the $58,447,231, which will be the proposed tax levy for 2023. And it can show you what the dollar amount and also what the increase is overall. And I have just a few left on that one. I have a different tab on mine. What we got?
That's all the ones on the 5-year, Christie. I can show within the budget book, there is the reference to the funding for
Yep.
other governmental entities that Christie
Yep.
referenced.
And I can tell you what the increase is, because we saw that one, and the increase was $515,981. The increase to the CCITC was $528,000, almost, so $528,481. And that was all pretty much $488,000 of that was in subscription fees for software as a subscription. The nonprofits, there was a reduction of $62,500. The agencies such as the Healthcare Center, Adult Protective Services, Birth to 3, all had a level where there were no increases. The expenses were the same, and the levy contributions are the same. And there is one additional item that was added, which is economic development, and that is a $50,000 that was placed in there for the Education and Economic Development Committee for their use in the 2023 budget. And that would be allocated directly to them, and payments would be made from there. That consists of the increase in the support for other agencies. CCITC, the Economic and Education Committee amount of $50,000, and then a reduction for nonprofits. That was a 5-year wind down, and that was a reduction of $62,500.
Thanks, Christie. And then just for your reference, I won't go through, but if you're wondering where the funding for North Central Healthcare is referenced within the budget, it's on beginning on pages 44 and 45 are those other intergovernmental entities, and you'll see the the budget amounts, and Christy already referenced CCIT, the ADRC, Aging Disability Resource Center, North Central Healthcare, and the last one, North Central Regional Planning Commission. So those are on page 44 and 45. The last piece, and Chair Robinson alluded to this already. I know you have spent a great deal of time previously looking at the capital improvement plan. It begins on page 140 and continues on to page 141 in your budget. I just want to take just a couple of minutes to highlight some of the ideas that are within the document. It should look very familiar to you. It's what we've discussed already. Christy talked about CIP fund balance. That's that amount of money that rolls over post-audit, the year following the audit and funds projects. We have, in this year's funding plan, you'll see at the bottom of page 141, $6.12 million worth of projects that are funded through that mechanism. Tax levy, again, self-explanatory. That's that second major funding column, kind of from the middle of the page. Those are projects that are funded with tax levy. Grant funding, we have a limited number of projects that are funded by grants. The fourth column, ARPA, as I referenced before, there are no capital projects that are not previously approved that are funded through the capital improvement plan consistent with the direction from this body and the board. So you'll see there is $0 of ARPA funding for capital that are set forth in that document. Highway fund balance is that fifth column, and this is again a strategy based on the direction from the board to make sure that we weren't using ARPA funds in a way that might not support GTA, general transportation aid spending. We utilized highway fund balance to do that. We know highway fund balance dollars are going to qualify for general transportation aid eligible expense. Registration fees, I referenced those previously. That every dollar of the vehicle registration fee goes into our bituminous paving program. Other is kind of the catch-all. There are various ways that projects can be funded. Christy made reference to small CIP, that we have some projects, we have some line items within various budgets to fund things like general carpeting replacement that happens through the year. We don't have, not every carpet replacement project that we end up doing is directly approved through your annual budget process, but we have a small CIP fund that we dip into when we need to do those things. Maintenance projects, like your home, like Christy said, they come up during the year, and that's the $365,000 bucket is what we use for that. And we did fund some of our projects through that, from that small CIP, and most notably they are the Lakeview Professional, the LVPP parking lot replacement south side. You'll see, and I know this is hard to read, it kind of came in a bit fuzzy on the document, and I'll work on that after this meeting. But there's $11,307 from CIP fund balance, $79,993. Our plan is to take that from small CIP. Similarly, the courtrooms, the line right below it, you'll see in that other column, $65,000. The strategy in this CIP document as it exists now, consistent with the direction you gave, that we don't use ARPA for any non-previously approved capital expense. We utilize some small capital dollars to make sure we move forward with those projects. But the organization of this document should feel very familiar to what we discussed before. The last column after other is unfunded. And those are projects that, based on our assessment as staff, didn't fall into any of those projects where it's end of life or truly necessary maintenance. Through our budget proposal, we have funded all truly necessary projects that, when we looked at them as they were organized, that are end of life or truly maintenance projects. We funded all of those. I want to talk about a couple that are under this end of life maintenance regulatory column that you'll see are in the unfunded area. And those are the project requests that came in through this committee for the allocation of American Rescue Plan Act dollars. So the Big O Plain shower and restroom facility enhancements, those were end of life or maintenance projects. That's how they were categorized. But we did not fund the Big O Plain project, the 9 Mile chalet renovation, or the Dells of the Eau Claire restroom and shower facility and lift station and camper cabins. Our intent is to bring that back to this committee along with those other American Rescue Plan Act applications. And when you read through the budget, you'll hear me talk about, you have received a great many applications for funding. And rather than propose to fund those projects through the capital improvement plan, my suggestion through the proposed budget is that this committee again take a look at all of those applications, that we get you some better information on how those projects contribute to the general sustainability of parks maintenance and revenue, and then you can make a more informed decision about where you allocate your American Rescue Plan Act dollars moving forward. So that's the capital improvement funding plan as it's laid out. You'll have time to dial in and look at each of those individual projects. But that really wraps up all I had in terms of what those kind of highlights and investments are. And I want to wrap up all of my comments with a couple of things. What are those policy areas? I said I was going to talk about what are some policy areas for that are front and center. Certainly, I'll start with number one. You can move anything you want. You are the policymakers of the budget. If you want to reallocate funds from one area to another to increase service in one area, decrease it in another, it is your prerogative as a policymaker to do that, as a body to do that. One thing, I know you know this, but not all dollars in the budget are created equal. We're talking about property tax dollars through the resolution that the board is ultimately going to adopt. There are other revenues, as Christy referenced, that if you want to diminish those funds within a budget, you also diminish the ability to have the revenue. So if you diminish the expense, the revenue goes with it. So it's not that cutting $1 in one area is the same as another. I know Chair Robinson has made that point at the full board in previous terms of the board relative to highway spending. And there's also consequences to, as we referenced, general transportation aids. If you make reductions in certain areas, they follow you. General transportation aids is one of those. So the first policy area is everything. You have control over every area of this budget within those bounds. Like I said, not every dollar is equal. Second, I referenced this before, the $50,000 for the Extension, Education, Economic Development Committee to talk about childcare and housing. I know that's not enough. You are certainly able to completely eliminate it, keep it the same, or increase it. You, as a policy body, need to decide what role, if any, you want to play, and whether or not you want to have that discussion about your role in the first place. But that's an area I think that is certainly ripe for discussion. And the last one really relates to CIP, and there's a reason I left this up here. I made reference to the direction from the board about not funding any projects, with capital improvement dollars that weren't previously approved. And I think there's one area that perhaps you would benefit from at least discussion. And that what-if scenario relates specifically to the water project at Marathon Park, the compliance project. It's the first project on the second page of your capital funding plan. It's that $950,000 projected cost on the top line. That, from our estimation, our review, would be an American Rescue Plan Act eligible expense. It is water infrastructure. In fact, this committee and the full board directed that the design work for that project be funded with American Rescue Plan Act dollars. I did not fund the project with American Rescue Plan Act dollars because you didn't previously approve that project through your approval process. You certainly could do that. And I do have some thoughts for you to consider if you want to do that. You could move that $950,000 expense from the CIP fund balance. And if you funded that with American Rescue Plan Act dollars, you have a great many options, but it strikes me as perhaps a prudent one to consider is perhaps lessening the extent to which we utilize highway fund balance to fund highway projects. So you'll see on the first line of the first page of your capital improvement plan in this proposal, there's $761,891 that is proposed to be funded from highway fund balance for bituminous resurfacing. My suggestion for you to consider is if you do use the $950,000 of American Rescue Plan Act to fund the water compliance project, it strikes me as a prudent exercise to move that $761,891 from highway fund balance and put that into CIP fund balance. You preserve the opportunity for that highway fund balance in the future. You can then also utilize some of those excess funds, because of course $950,000 is more than $761,000, to do a couple other projects. And again, that what if scenario, and those would be the Lakeview professional parking lot replacement that I referenced before that is currently proposed to be funded with other. It's in the other column. That's that small CIP, as well as the courtroom carpeting replacement is proposed in the plan before you to be funded. That project is $65,000. It's proposed to be funded with that small CIP. Strikes me as a prudent exercise to move those from small CIP, move it back to fund those with CIP fund balance so that you preserve that small CIP balance. But that was the real project that when we went through the CIP process as staff, we developed a plan that does follow through on the directive you provided, but something to think about whether or not you want to utilize those American Rescue Plan Act dollars. Clearly, it would be eligible based on our analysis. It's a water infrastructure project. It would be a use of ARPA funds that then wouldn't fall under the category of lost revenue, which, again, from a fiscal perspective as your administrator, my suggestion to you is consider that perhaps we may have some difficulty categorizing all of our ARPA funds as lost revenue. So when we have projects that clearly fit within a category, it strikes me as a prudent exercise to fund them that way if we are going to do them in any event. So with that, I think I hope I've covered everything. I appreciate your attention. It's been a long presentation, but we went through the highlights. We went through the strategies that we considered as staff to put forward the budget based on the directives you've given. And then we've also highlighted some of those policy areas apart from your absolute role to shift funding based on what you deem to be appropriate priorities, but some of those policy decisions that are really ripe for discussion. So with that, Mr. Chair, happy to take any questions if you want to do that at this time.
Before we open up for questions, let's just lay out the process that we'll be using. So today we're being presented with the administrator's budget, and later in the agenda you'll be asked to accept the administrator's budget. It then becomes the committee's budget, and then we have scheduled a meeting to take action on it for next Monday morning at 8 o'clock. That allows Christie the opportunity to adjust the numbers for publication in the paper. We have that will then be presented to the county board. In the past, what we've done is we've taken feedback from the county board and looked at whether or not there are any need for amendments, and then develop recommendations to the county board based upon those comments. But those recommendations would be considered as an amendment to the budget once we approve it next week. And I know this is a short turnaround, a little bit too short, perhaps. I think we'll work on, as the administrator said, trying to give us a little bit more opportunity in the future to do it. But so the process would be for us to accept the administrator's budget, see what concerns that you have, and then on next Monday we could look at what sort of amendments we might want to have based upon either the administrator's recommendations or comments that you have. So with that, we'll open it up for questions from the committee. Committee first and then other county board members. Any questions? Gail?
Thank you, Chair. I was wondering on North Central Healthcare if we are servicing the debt for them in 2022 and possibly 2023. Is Langley and Lincoln County, the other partners, contributing toward that?
No. The infrastructure, the debt that's on the schedule is the debt that is for Marathon County facilities. So that is an obligation of Marathon County. So for example, there are North Central Healthcare facilities in each of the other two counties. If facility improvements are made there, those are the obligation of the other two counties. I'll make one caveat. Certainly the operations of North Central Healthcare, it's a shared intergovernmental agreement. We're partners in the operations of North Central. So to the extent that North Central is able to service that debt through its operations, and we hope to, over the course of the next several years, build that capacity, those counties are in that fashion contributing to the debt service. But no, they are not asked to contribute to facilities that are Marathon County owned. And one explanation as to why is if the partnership goes away, those are our assets. They're Marathon County assets, your assets, for you to utilize as you deem appropriate.
But the debt service is not being forgiven. The expectation is that in the future, the North Central Healthcare's financial status would change and that the bonded indebtedness, principal and interest, would be repaid to the county.
Does North Central Healthcare have all their programs open by the end of the year? I know that they currently had some programs that were still not fully open.
I know there are some not open at this point. We did just have a presentation. I attended a North Central staff meeting yesterday where Interim Executive Director McBain outlined a couple of things when they are going to open, and I know some programs are slated to open before the end of the year. But if you have a specific program you're asking about, I can look into it, but I'm not intimately aware of what those deadlines are for when they're going to open.
One of the concerns, I just want to pick up on those questions, is that we were supposed to have a budget from North Central Healthcare, and I understand they're still in the process of trying to evaluate where they are, but it makes it difficult for this body to understand what the needs are going forward. And I would hope that certainly in the future that we have a budget earlier in the process so that we have changes in programs that we want to expand, whether it's behavioral health, CART, and others, that we can have that full disclosure. And I know that they're trying to recover from the pandemic and get a better understanding of what the finances are, but it really puts us in an awkward position of trying to understand how or what the needs are and where their opportunities are. Kurt.
Yeah, on that note, it's been a challenge, with bringing in the finance director down at NCHC and bringing him in the middle of the year has led to a little bit of the complexities to formulate that budget, but they are doing a much better job of understanding all of the programs and the budgeting, and we hope to abide by what the Tri-County Agreement calls for in next year as far as presentation of the budget moving forward.
Are there other questions today? And you have a chance, this is new to you, and I would encourage you as you go through the budget to formulate those questions. If you have proposed amendments, let Christy, Lance, or I know, and we can try to work on what those might look like next week. But we're on a quick turnaround. I think all in all, I want to thank administration for the job that they've done. I'd like to perhaps see a little bit better we've always kind of slighted the capital improvement, and I have some ideas on how we might present some of that information to the county board for more clarity, and we'll work on that between now and that presentation. Other committee members' questions before we go to non-committee members? Any committee members have questions? If not, Supervisor Baker.
Thank you, Chair Robinson. On the CIP second page at the top, it says highway fund balances, where we're using highway fund balance. At the bottom, it says, if I can read it correct, total amount from borrowing. Is that a mistake, or can you explain that? And then also, what is the highway fund balance, the amount? Thank you.
You're correct, that's a mistake. That should say total from fund balance. In past budgets, that was total from borrowing. Christie, do you want to take the comment on generally what highway fund balance is and what our strategy is in utilizing it? And the other thing I'll just say before Christie takes it, we did have conversations with Commissioner Griesbach from the Highway Department, and ultimately we're confident that fund balance is a strong source of funding for this year's budget, but as is any fund balance, it doesn't exist in perpetuity if you keep spending it. So Christie, you want to take that?
Yeah, and I apologize. I trying to make the CIP a little bit more flexible. And we weren't using debt, so I just used that column, and I didn't. That's my fault. I didn't see at the bottom. I tied out the numbers and didn't look at the words.
That's no problem. I just figured if I was confused,
Yeah.
probably other people would be also.
But what the fund balance, there's actually several parts of the fund balance in almost all of our fund balances. Now they have a total fund balance of a little over about 50 million, of which we have a policy that shows 10% of the expenditures in that budget will be held in working capital. So we calculate that on an annual basis. That's audited. That's a little over 6.5 million. They had previously tracked the work in progress part of it because some of those projects, like we say, are not completed in the end of a year and they're being held. Because of the way that we track in Kayenta, we don't really have a good handle on where they're at with that. We will once we move to Chems Pro. So we estimate a little over $11 million is really work in progress that's being held in there. And they have contributed capital, which is about 1.3, a reserve for capital replacement of 8, leaving us with a little over $23 million available. And so we talked to Jim about if we could use that about 9 to 10 million because of the fact that he had the $10 million resolution. That's those projects that you see on the fund balance to make up that difference that we're losing in GTA and then rolling stock and the 761. That was the difference that we would have had to make up in tax levy for the bituminous.
One of the things that I'd like to do between now and Monday morning is to go back and revisit some of our ARPA commitments, because we had set aside money for the highway projects with the assumption that we could capture the general transportation aid if we did those expenditures. We're now hearing that it's not, and I think we might want to do is just revisit those numbers to do a reality check. We've got 3.9 million budgeted for broadband. We can't do the $3 million loan that we had anticipated. So I think what we need to do is maybe truth test those numbers so we've got a better understanding of what our actual commitments are. We've also, the PTO, we've got some budgeted and the program is done. So I think we ought to look at freeing those dollars up so that we're not caught at the 11th hour with a significant surplus. So we'll try to commit that for the purposes of having the discussion about whether or not some of the other projects should be funded through ARPA. And then ultimately it'll be a decision of the county board, but we'll try to have that information by Friday so you have a chance to look at it for Monday.
And that's just how this kind of happened too, because they had originally established those highway projects under the ARPA resolution. And then as this evolved, we moved the columns to where the funding could be placed. So that was kind of the evolution of that.
Other questions? All right, if not, I'm going to just take things out of order. I would ask that we go to item 8C, 8B3, relative, I'm sorry, 7. B3, acceptance of the county administrator's proposed budget. And what that does is it transfers it from the administrator to us, and then we move forward. Is there are there any questions? Chair Gibbs.
No, I was just going to make a motion to accept the county administrator's proposed 2023 annual budget and the 2023 capital special projects funding plan.
Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Leahy. And again, this isn't a vote in support or opposition. It's more custodial and changes responsibility from administration to this committee. Any questions? If not, all those in favor of the motion of accepting the budget in the capital improvement plan will signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. And then do we have, did you want to go over the resolution for the 2023 budget and property tax levy that's in the packet?
So I won't belabor this point, but I do think it does a nice job of separating out what I referenced before, that overall levy is composed of its component parts. So you have operating levy. That is the levy listed under sub Roman numeral 1 of $50,160,484. That's the amount of operating levy that was increased from the 2022 budget you adopted by net new construction, which was $856,069. The special purpose levy and bridge aid is what I referenced before, culvert and bridge aid. It's a function of the culvert and bridge aid program and the needs that exist within the culvert and bridge system on any given year. So that has fluctuated. I believe last year it was about $450,000 last year, so it's gone up slightly. The special purpose levy for the library, as it denotes, that's the library operating levy that I referenced before. And then debt levy is the amount of debt of that 7.1-ish number that I referenced before, and that's within your budget document. That 4.284 million is the amount of the overall debt obligation that Marathon County has that you're servicing through debt service levy. The remaining 2.6 million of that overall debt obligation that Christy and I referenced, that's being serviced by sales tax. And then the $500,000 remaining is other miscellaneous revenues, including interest income. So I don't know, Christy, is there anything else you wanted to reference on that document?
Yeah, actually, just the one thing I forgot to tell about, I was talking about in the contingency fund again, 750 county board, 50 is yours, and it does specifically state in statute that there can be a finance committee one. So that one you've seen before, and that's why we put it in there, just to highlight it and make sure we, again, captured it, and that there is an understanding that the contingency fund has those two parts to it.
That issue is here today for informational issues. We will be acting on that on, whenever, do we need to do that on Monday as well?
Mm-hmm.
So we'll act on it on Monday as well, so. But that is here for, again, just for information. Any other questions? I know that it's a lot to digest. I would imagine that you'll have some questions as we go through this. Please, if you have a chance, forward them so we can try to get some answers. Kurt?
Yeah, as we have done in the past, I think we need to specifically think about if we're going to make some adjustments, have those adjustments at least discussed by Christie as far as an amendment, but that's just for this committee initially, and then eventually, once this committee's adopted it, the board has to also provide, if they want to make a budget amendment, that budget amendment be discussed with Finance Department and Corp Counsel, so that the specific budget line items are identified as to where they're going to take money from and move it to.
All right, any other questions? If not, our next meeting is Monday, the 17th. We,
Is it,
it's at 8,
8
it's at 8
a.m.
a.m. At 8 a.m., not 3 p.m. So if you could make that note. And then our follow-up meeting would be on the 25th. There's a broadband symposium or seminar in Wausau that day, and that runs till probably 4:30. I was hoping to attend it. I'm wondering if we'll look at some options. We may change the time and/or the date of that meeting, if that's convenience. If it doesn't work, then we'll stick with it, but just give you a heads up that we may look at changing the time of that. If anybody would like to know about broadband funding opportunities, there would be a great seminar at the Jefferson Street Inn, free of charge. All right, if nothing else, we are down to item 9. What are your wishes? Moved by Chair Gibbs, seconded by Supervisor Lemmer. All those in favor of adjournment will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. I think we have worn them out.